India has hit out at the United States and European Union with its sharpest statement till date. This since US President Donald Trump announced a 25% on Indian goods along with an unspecified penalty for its defense and energy imports from Russia. New Delhi has hit back saying the targeting of India was unjustified and unreasonable, and the country would take all necessary measures to safeguard its national interests and economic security. The Ministry of External Affairs issued the strong statement late on Monday, soon after Donald Trump warned that he would raise the tariff on India substantially. Remember, this is not a first for the US president. In fact, in his latest attack, the US president has accused India of profiting from the war in Ukraine, and I quote, "India is not only buying massive amounts of Russian oil, they are then, for much of the oil purchased, selling it on the open market for big profits. They don't care how many people in Ukraine are being killed by the Russian war machine. Because of this, I will be substantially raising the tariff paid by India to the USA." Meanwhile, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar too spoke of the desire for a fair global order and not one dominated by a few.
Our collective desire is to see a fair and representative global order, not one dominated by a few.
The MEA in its statement also called out the US and European Union's hypocrisy for continuing trade with Russia. This is the first time India has targeted the US government for procuring Russian commodities for their nuclear and automobile industry. It said that India, in fact, began importing from Russia since traditional oil supplies were diverted to Europe after the Russia-Ukraine conflict started. The MEA statement said India's imports were meant to ensure predictable and affordable energy costs to the Indian consumer. And I quote again, "They are a necessity compelled by global market situation. However, it is revealing that the very nations criticizing India are themselves indulging in trade with Russia. Unlike our case, such trade is not even a vital national compulsion." Now, it should be noted that the Indian statement has been consistent since the war in Ukraine broke out in February 2022. It has been reiterated by Indian officials and ministers in public and in private to the American and European governments in the last 3 years. Because the MEA has thrown up some shocking figures that expose the Western hypocrisy. It says, and I quote again, "The European Union in 2024 had a bilateral trade of €67.5 billion in goods with Russia. In addition, it had trade and services estimated at €17.2 billion in 2023. This is significantly more than India's total trade with Russia that year or subsequently." The statement also highlights that Europe-Russia trade includes not just energy but also fertilizers, mining products, chemicals, iron and steel, and machinery and transport equipment. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a reiteration of Dr. Jaishankar's statement in 2022 when he said that what Europe buys in an afternoon is what India buys in a month. The vast disparity between the two couldn't get more stark. Most importantly, New Delhi has called out Washington for its double standards. Let me quote, "Where the United States is concerned, it continues to import from Russia uranium, hexafluoride for its nuclear industry, palladium for its EV industry, fertilizers as well as chemicals." In this background, the targeting of India is unjustified and unreasonable. Like any major economy, India will take all necessary measures to safeguard its national interests and economic security. Also, what stands out is the fact that the US and much of the West did not want Russia's supply to completely go off the international market. That is why, instead of placing Russian oil under sanctions, the price cap on Russian crude was introduced when Joe Biden was US president. Understand this. Russia is among the top oil producers globally, and so its oil exports going off the market could push up international oil prices significantly, which is why India's purchase of Russian oil has kept oil prices under check, a point that has been well established by India's foreign ministry. Interestingly, the Biden administration seemed satisfied with the price cap and let Russian oil flow, but Donald Trump has taken a more aggressive stance. So much so, he has threatened financial costs on importers of Russian energy. New Delhi and Washington are yet to reach a trade deal, but differences over market access for American agricultural products is among the key roadblocks. India's Russian oil imports, which form a bulk of its total crude oil imports, have also emerged as an irritant in the India-US relationship amid Trump's growing frustration with Russia. This renewed pressure from the US and other Western powers has forced Russia's top trade partners to cut down on imports from the country, one aimed at forcing the Kremlin's hand into ending the Ukraine war. For Trump, who wants the Russia-Ukraine war to end within days, this is an opportune time to pressure countries like India and China over their Russian imports, given the sensitive trade negotiations that these countries are holding with the US. Bolstering India's case is also Russia. Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has lashed out at US for pursuing what it calls neo-colonial policy to maintain hegemony. The country's spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, has called sanctions and restrictions a regrettable reality of today's historical stage that affects the entire world, one that the US cannot come to terms with: the loss of hegemony in the emerging world order. Zakharova was referring to the BRICS bloc, originally comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but one that's also expanded till 2025. Remember, Donald Trump has opposed India buying oil from Russia in the past too, but this is the first time he has voiced his problem with India selling the purchased oil on the open market, that too for big profits, a direct insinuation that India is war profiteering. And that's why New Delhi has had enough, which is why India's statement exposes the Western hypocrisy. It should be kept in mind that proceeds made from selling oil and gas are key to keeping Russia's war machine going, precisely because oil and gas account for almost a third of Russia's state revenue and more than 60% of its exports. Believe it or not, but Russia has continued to make billions from fossil fuel exports to the West. Sample this. According to Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, or CREA, at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, Russian gas is still piped to Europe in increasing quantities via Turkey. The question that arises is, why isn't Donald Trump now questioning a NATO ally like Turkey? Amounts received by Russia in fossil fuel revenue and by Ukraine in allocated aid from February 2022 to February 2025 has been tripled. According to CREA, the lion's share of that amount is €209 billion that came from EU member states alone. So much so, EU states continued importing pipeline gas directly from Russia until Ukraine cut the transit in January 2025, and Russian crude oil is still piped to Hungary and Slovakia. So at a time Iran's oil trade has been heavily sanctioned by the United States, and OPEC is buckling under pressure to meet the rising global demands, can India and the global South afford to bow down to the whims and fancies of an unpredictable US president?